So in this video, we're going to look at the parts of the cell. And if you are in my class, you have a chart that has these different parts in them. And this may or may not go in the right order. But if you remember, in the case of the parts of the cell, these are little things that we call organelles. And I always compare the cell to a city. So as I talk about this, like I'll talk about how the Golgi body is like the post office, and how the endoplasmic reticulum is like the subway system, and the nucleus is like a bank because it stores really important stuff. And remember, in the case of prokaryotes, pro means no. So prokaryotes are bacteria. They have no nucleus, and most of these organelles they will not have. Eu means do. So usually when we talk about the parts of the cell or we talk about a cell, we're talking about a eukaryote. Remember, eukaryote is a cell that does have a nucleus, and it is going to have most, if not all, of these parts that I'm talking about. So in the case of prokaryotes, pro means no, that's bacteria. And usually when a teacher is talking about a cell, if they're talking about a prokaryote, they'll say they're talking about a prokaryote, or they'll say they're talking about bacteria. But if they just talk about a cell, they're going to be talking about a eukaryote, because a eukaryote is going to have all these parts. So the first part we're going to talk about is what's called the plasma membrane. And I always consider the plasma membrane to be like a screen on your window or a screen door. And you guys know it has little openings in it. Well, in the case of the plasma membrane, its job is to allow things in or out. And in this picture here, you see these little purple dots. These are things that we call phosphates, and they like being near water. And then the lipids, which if you remember are fats, which is why this layer is in yellow, is nonpolar, so it doesn't like water. So we talked about how with lipids, it's really important to have lipids surrounding our cells because it basically keeps us from dissolving. If we didn't have this layer of lipids around our cells, we wouldn't be here. Because remember, water is the universal solvent. It tends to dissolve things. So by having what we call the phospholipid bilayer, which means it's two layers of these little creatures that have a head and two tails. So we basically have two thin layers of fat going around every cell as part of the plasma membrane, and that helps keep the cell from dissolving. The plasma membrane is found in every cell. If you're a cell, you have a plasma membrane. Remember, structure determines function. To be a cell, you have to have certain parts. You have to have a plasma membrane, you have to have cytoplasm, you have to have genetic material, and you have to have ribosomes. So in order to be a cell, you have to have a plasma membrane. And its job is to allow things in or out. So like I said, I always consider this to be like a screen door, because if you're big enough to get through the little holes in the screen, you can come back and forth whenever you want to. Like ants can crawl in through those little holes, but flies are too big. And like you're too big. So the plasma membrane also has little doors, but we're going to talk about the plasma membrane in another video all by itself. So if you're filling in the chart, with your chart, you've got the function, you've got unique characteristics, you've got where it talks about type of cell. So on that chart, the diagram would be like this little thing here with the purple and the little legs. Okay. Function, like it says here, it's a barrier that surrounds the cell and controls what enters. Okay. I always put like a screen door. Type of cell, I want you to put all. All cells have it, whether you're a prokaryote or a eukaryote. And then just some unique characteristics can be anything that I just talked about. So you can pause it if you need to. The next thing we have here is the cytoplasm. Now, anytime you see CYT, CYT means cell. So the cytoplasm is basically the jelly that makes up the cell. It says it's a clear fluid inside the cell, mostly water, and its function is basically to hold the things in place. We've all had Jell-O before. So you know how Jell-O is just kind of like this goo? Well, that's really what the cytoplasm is like. And it basically holds the organelles in place, because if the cell was all water, just like if you were to drop things into a glass of water, everything would sink to the bottom and stack on top of each other. We don't want things stacking on top of each other. So on your chart, there's really nothing you can draw for the cytoplasm because it's a goo. Its function is to be the site of many cellular reactions. Its job is to hold the organelles. Type of cell, all cells. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes. You have to have cytoplasm in order to be a cell. And then just unique characteristics, it's just kind of like a jelly goo. So pause this if you need to. The next on your list is a nucleus. Now remember, in the case of a nucleus, even though your chart says type of cell, animal or plant, I want you to write eukaryotes. Okay? Animal cells are eukaryotes, plant cells are eukaryotes, protists are eukaryotes, fungus are eukaryotes. If you're a eukaryote, you have a nucleus. Remember, eu means do. Bacteria are prokaryotes. Pro means no. So they do not have a nucleus. So usually with the nucleus, it's usually drawn looking like a circle. And its function is to control the cellular functions. I call the nucleus the bank. Okay. Banks have safes, and those safes lock up important things. They lock up money, they lock up jewelry. Think of your nucleus as a safe. Okay. Its job is to protect your DNA. Okay. Your DNA is the diamond necklace that has been in your family forever. Your DNA is the cookbook that wins all of the awards at the state fair for you. Okay. And your DNA needs to be protected. Okay. So in the case of eukaryotes, we put our DNA inside of the nucleus, and the nucleus helps protect our DNA. Prokaryotes, things like bacteria, do not have a nucleus. So their DNA is easy to get to, their DNA is easy to mutate. This is why bacteria can change so quickly, because their DNA can change so quickly. So with the function, its job is basically to protect your DNA. And when we talk about the DNA being your genetic information, remember your DNA are cookbooks, and those cookbooks tell you what proteins to make. And proteins tell your cells what to do. So the DNA of animal cells would have different genes than the DNA of plant cells. So since the DNA of animal cells have different genes, we don't have a recipe for making chlorophyll. We don't have a recipe for making a cell wall. So different types of cells have different recipes, so they're going to make different proteins. And your cells need to protect this cookbook. So our cells lock them up inside the nucleus. So the function again is to protect the DNA. It's found in eukaryotes only, and just a unique characteristic of it, it's got a double membrane around it. So remember, by having a double membrane, that's like having two walls. So that's going to add better protection to your DNA. Now, also under unique characteristics or somewhere on your chart, you're going to need to add the next thing. So you can add it at the bottom, you can add it in the margin somewhere, but you need to write nuclear envelope. Well, actually, where it talks about has a double membrane here, you could put double membrane equals nuclear envelope. You'll also see this called the nuclear membrane. They're the same thing. Okay? But again, this is that 2 layers. Okay? It's also made from phospholipids. So it also has a layer of fat around it to keep the nucleus from dissolving. Because remember, the cell has a lot of water in it, and we don't want the nucleus to dissolve, because if the nucleus dissolves, our DNA can be damaged. So the nuclear envelope is that phospholipid membrane. So where you wrote has a double membrane, you could put equals the nuclear envelope. You also need somewhere to add the nucleolus. And the nucleolus is this little creature that lives inside of our nucleus. And for years, we weren't quite sure what it did, but now we know it helps our bodies make ribosomes. And ribosomes are always represented by little dots, and the job of the ribosomes are to make proteins. So at any point in time, if you need to pause this, please do so the information can get written down. So next on your chart are ribosomes. Anytime you see the root word rib or ribe in biology, it means a protein. So ribosomes are always drawn looking like little black dots, always. And in the case of ribosomes, every single cell has a ribosome. That's one of the things you have to be. Remember, structure determines function. To be a cell, you have to have certain parts. You have to have a cell membrane, you have to have cytoplasm, you have to have genetic material, and you have to have ribosomes. Because the job of the ribosomes is to make proteins. And the ribosomes themselves are made by the nucleolus. And ribosomes can float around your cell. That's all these little black polka dots. But they can also be bound to something called the endoplasmic reticulum. So please pause to make sure the students get the notes that they need. Then we have the ER. Oh, let me go back for a second. I always think of the ribosomes as being the factories. They're making stuff that the cells have to have in order to survive. So I think of the nucleus as the bank. I think of the plasma membrane as the screened-in porch. And I think of the ribosomes as a factory. In the case of the endoplasmic reticulum, I think of these as subways. Now, these definitions on here, do not write these down. I'm going to tell you what to write where. Okay? Don't write these down. I want you to think of the ER as a subway. Some of you have never been on subways before, but you know what they are. They're tunnels that are built underground to carry people around. Well, remember, the cytoplasm is a gel. So imagine if I were to fill a swimming pool up with Jell-O, and you were an ant, and you had to get from one side to the next. It'd be really hard to do. Well, your cell is constantly having to have things move around, so they need tunnels that they can move through. And that's what the endoplasmic reticulum are. So with your endoplasmic reticulum, they're always drawn looking like tubes. And their job is basically to let things move around inside of the cell. Now, you do have two types, so you do need to make sure you write those two types down somewhere. The first one is called the rough ER, and the second one is called the smooth ER. And these are found in eukaryotes only. Prokaryotes do not have these. And in the case of the rough ER, it gets its name because it looks bumpy, because the rough ER has ribosomes attached to it. The rough ER is sometimes called the ribosome ER. So if the ribosomes are making proteins, the job of the rough ER is to move those proteins around. The smooth ER gets its name because it doesn't have anything attached to it. And its job is to move lipids around. So on your chart, the diagram, it always looks like tubes. And there are subways. Their job is to move things around inside the cell. Types of cells are eukaryotes. And unique characteristics, you've got two types. You've got the rough ER, which helps move proteins and has ribosomes attached to it, and the smooth ER, which helps move lipids around and has nothing attached to it. Pause if you need to. Then we have the Golgi. It can be called the Golgi body. It can be called the Golgi apparatus. The key word here is Golgi. And I call these guys the post office. They're also drawn looking like little tubes, but they tend to be closer to the cell membrane because their job is to ship things out. I call them the post office. You can call it Amazon. You can call it UPS. You can call it FedEx. But their job is to ship things out of the cell. That's their function. And types of cells, as you can see here, are eukaryotes. Now, under unique characteristics, you need to write this term vesicle. When you need to mail something, you've got to put it into a box. You just can't take a piece of paper to the post office. You got to put it in an envelope and you have to address it. Or if you want to ship, when Amazon sends something to you, they just can't just put a shirt in the mail. They have to put it into some type of package. Well, when your cells need to send out trash, or maybe your cells need to share nutrients with another cell, or maybe your cells need to send out hormones, they have to package them up. They have to put them into a box. And that little box that we use to send things out of the cells is what's called a vesicle. And so the Golgi body's job is to take, just like the post office, you take something to the post office, they put it in a box for you, and then they mail it to wherever it needs to go. That's what the Golgi body or the Golgi apparatus is going to do for you. So again, it's always drawn as little tubes. Okay. Its function is the post office. Its job is to basically ship things out of the cell. It could be trash, it could be nutrients, it could be hormones. Okay. Types of cells are going to be eukaryotes, and unique characteristics are these vesicles. Okay. The vesicles are the little packages that they make in order to send things out. So pause if you need to. Then we have these things called lysosomes. Anytime you see the root word lyse, L-Y-S, L-Y-S-O, L-Y-S-E, lyse always means to destroy. I call these guys my bulldozers. They're always drawn as little circles. Vesicles are always drawn as little circles. So if you're asked to label something, either would be fine. But I call these my bulldozers because their job is to break down things inside of cells. Now I want you to put a star next to these because these are found in animal cells only. So far, like the plasma membrane was in all cells, cytoplasm, all cells, nucleus, eukaryotes, ribosomes, all cells, endoplasmic, eukaryotes, Golgi, eukaryotes. Lysosomes are animal cells only. So put a star next to that. That's the difference between plant and animal cells. And their job is to break things down in the cell. Again, if you think of an organelle as a building, buildings can become dilapidated and buildings can take hundreds of years to fall apart. Well, if you're that property owner and you want to build a new house, you don't have 100 years to wait for the old house to fall apart. So you go in and you bulldoze it. Well, the parts of your cells only live for so long, and then they start to fall apart. So the job of the lysosome is to go in and bulldoze them, get rid of the old parts so that your cell can make a new part. So for their function, they're the bulldozers. Their job is to break things down, and they're found in animal cells only. So unique characteristics is that they contain digestive enzymes, and we'll use those enzymes to help break things down. So that should be the front of your chart. So we're now on the back of your chart. The back of your chart is called a vacuole. I want you to put another star next to this one because this is also a difference between plant and animal cells. And the diagram, again, it's always drawn as a bubble. Lots of things look like bubbles. But its function is to store things. So I call this the refrigerator, the closet, the garage, whatever. It's going to store stuff. And it's found in eukaryotes. But here's the difference. Like we said, we put a star next to it. Plants only have one really big vacuole because in plants, the vacuoles are going to store water. Remember, plants don't know when they're going to get water, so they're going to store as much as possible, and they'll store it inside of one big water cooler. Animal cells, we tend to make lots of small ones, and most of our vacuoles will store sugar. Remember, with animals or fungi, we cannot make sugar. So we need to store sugar. So our cells will store sugar inside of these little vacuoles. So you've got a star next to this one. They're drawn as bubbles. Its job is to store things like a refrigerator, a pantry, a closet, whatever you want. It's found in eukaryotic cells, eukaryotes. And you've got a difference between plant and animal cells. Plant cells tend to have one big one that stores water, and animal cells tend to have lots of small ones that store sugars. Now we have the mitochondria. The mitochondria is always looking like a kidney bean. It's always drawn looking like a brown bean. And a lot of you remember this, you did the parts of the cell in middle school. And for some reason, this is the one that everybody remembers. Everybody remembers this as the powerhouse of the cell. I call it the gas station because its function is to create the gasoline that your cells need in order to run. When your car needs to run, you go get gas. When your cells need to run, they make something called ATP. Your cars need gas to run, your cells need ATP to run. And the job of the mitochondria is to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. A as in apple, T as in Tina, P as in Paul, ATP. And your mitochondria does something called respiration. Usually when you think of respiration, you think of breathing, and that's not what respiration is. Respiration is where you take sugar and you use it to make ATP. So diagram, it's always drawn looking like a brown bean. Its function is to do what's called respiration. And respiration makes the chemical ATP, which is the gasoline your cells need in order to work. And we're going to have a whole unit just on respiration, talking about how the mitochondria works later. It's found in eukaryotes. And a unique characteristic is it's believed to have been a bacteria by itself at one time. Mitochondria have their own DNA. And the mitochondria can kind of do their own little thing. And another cool fact is you only get your mitochondria from your mom. But we'll talk more about that when we do respiration. Now, put a star next to chloroplast because this is another difference between plant and animal cells. And this is always drawn looking like a green jelly bean. And its job is to do photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is needed to make sugar. And I just talked about why we need sugar. Every cell needs gasoline, just like every car, well, not every day, not anymore, but a lot of cars need gasoline in order to run. Your cells need ATP in order to run. So every cell in nature needs sugar. Well, photosynthesis makes that sugar, and it's done by chloroplast. So under type of cell, I want you to put plants, algae, and some bacteria. These cells have the ability to do photosynthesis so they can make sugar, and then all creatures will use that sugar in order to make that gasoline called ATP. So we're going to have a unit where we do photosynthesis and respiration together because they go hand in hand. And under unique characteristics, you know that chloroplasts store chlorophyll, which is a green pigment that traps sunlight. And pause the video if you need to. You're also going to put another star next to this one. This is another difference between plant and animals. Okay? The cell wall. The cell wall is always looking like a brick wall or a square around the cell. Now remember, you have to have a cell membrane in order to be a cell. So plants, fungi, algae, some bacteria, they have a cell wall around their cell membrane. And its structure is basically to help protect the cell and help hold the cell up. Plants can grow. Fungi can grow tall. Seaweed can grow. So we have bones to help us stand up. Plant cells have cell walls to help them stand up. Mushrooms have cell walls to help them stand up. Seaweed has cell walls to help them stand up. In the case of bacteria, their cell walls are going to help protect them. But we're going to talk about all these creatures later. So on your chart with the cell wall, it's always drawn looking like a square. Right? And its function is to hold things up, give it support and protect it. Okay? Type of cells, plants, fungi, algae, particularly seaweed, and some bacteria. And unique characteristics, it's found outside of the plasma membrane, which is also the cell membrane, and it's made of cellulose. And remember, anytime you see OSE at the end of the word, it's a sugar. Then we have cytoskeleton. Okay. Just like the name says, in order to be a skeleton, you have to protect and you have to provide support. If not, it can't be called a skeleton. Cyto remembers cell, so the cytoskeleton is basically the bones of the cell. But they don't have bones, they're made from proteins. So the cytoskeleton is always drawn looking like threads or toothpicks or things like that. Its function is to basically provide support. So just like your bones hold you together and help protect you, that's what this does. Types of cells will be eukaryotes. And under unique characteristics, just note it's made from proteins. Then we have cilia and flagella. These are both used for movement. And under types of cells, it really would be depends. Because some plant cells have cilia. Some animal cells have cilia. Some bacteria. So we can't say all cells. I would put depends because it depends. Like in the case of humans, the only cells that have flagella are sperm cells. So females don't even have cells with flagella. So they're both going to be used for movement. Under types of cells, it's going to depend on the cell. And then in the case of cilia, it's short hair structures. And flagella will be like these whip-like structures that act as propellers. Now you need to add centrioles down at the bottom. And you need to put a star next to this one because centrioles are found in animal cells only. And they're going to play a role in cell division, which is another unit we're going to talk about later. And they're drawn looking like these little star-shaped creatures. And they're found only in animal cells. So at this point in time, your chart should be finished. But let's just make sure we know plant versus animal cells. So make sure on your chart you have stars next to these things here. Only animal cells have centrioles and lysosomes. We have a star next to the vacuole because animal cells have lots of little vacuoles and plant cells have one big vacuole. And then animal cells have cell walls and animal cells have chloroplast. Hopefully this video helped you fill in what you needed to fill in.